In the year 1509, a boy of 17 became a king. He was tall, golden-haired, and beautiful. Poets called him Adonis. The people of England believed God himself had sent them a prince from legend. His name was Henry Tudor, the eighth of that name, and before his reign would end, he would tear his kingdom apart, break with a power that had ruled Europe for 1,000 years, execute 2 of his 6 wives, dissolve every monastery in England, and create a legacy so vast, so terrible, so magnificent, that 5 centuries later the world still speaks his name with wonder and horror in equal measure. This is the story of how one man's desires changed the fate of nations, how love became an obsession, how faith became a weapon, how a golden prince became a tyrant. This is the story of Henry VIII. To understand Henry, you must first understand the England he inherited, a realm barely healed from decades of civil war. The Wars of the Roses had torn the kingdom apart, brother against brother, the throne itself soaked in English blood. Henry's father had won his crown on a battlefield, pulling it from the broken head of a fallen tyrant. England was exhausted. The people craved stability. They craved glory. They craved a king who would make them proud. In 1509, the old king died. The crown passed to his son, young Henry, brilliant Henry. Henry, who had been raised not to rule, but to serve the church. His elder brother Arthur had been the heir. But Arthur had died young, and suddenly the spare became the successor. When Henry rode through London on the day of his coronation, the streets erupted. Bells rang from every church tower. Women wept with joy. Here, at last, was the king they had dreamed of. Renaissance prince, warrior poet, a king who could joust, compose music, speak Latin and French, debate theology with cardinals. A king who looked like a god and moved like a dancer. In those first golden years, England bloomed. Henry married Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the monarchs who had united Spain. She was intelligent, pious, and devoted. They seemed blessed. But beneath the glittering surface, a shadow was growing. Catherine gave birth to a daughter, Mary, but the sons she bore all died. Stillborn or living only for hours, again and again, pregnancy and hope, then grief and silence. Henry needed a male heir. Without a son, the kingdom might slip back into civil war. As the years passed and no son came, doubt crept into Henry's heart. Was God punishing him? Perhaps his marriage was cursed. And then, at a court pageant, Henry saw her, Anne Boleyn. Dark-eyed, sharp-tongued, graceful, and utterly unlike any woman he had known. She was magnetic. Henry became obsessed, but Anne Boleyn refused to be his mistress. She would be queen, or she would be nothing. And so began the king's great matter. Henry demanded an annulment from the Pope. Catherine refused. She swore her marriage was true and blessed. The Pope, trapped between Henry and Catherine's powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, delayed. He appointed commissions. He promised decisions, and then postponed them. Months became years, and Henry's patience shattered. What happened next changed England forever, changed the very structure of power in Europe. In 1533, Henry married Anne in secret. She was already pregnant. And then, in a series of acts pushed through Parliament, Henry severed England from Rome. He made himself supreme head of the Church of England. What the Pope would not grant, Henry simply took. For 1,000 years, Western Christendom had been united under Rome. Now, England stood alone. It was breathtaking, audacious, unprecedented. Those who opposed him paid terribly. Sir Thomas More, once his friend, refused to swear the oath. He was beheaded on a summer morning in 1535. Before the axe fell, he said he died as the king's good servant. but God's first. The king's mercy had curdled into cruelty. Those who had called him golden now called him tyrant. And Anne, the woman for whom Henry had torn apart Christendom, she gave birth not to a son, but to a daughter, Elizabeth. 3 more pregnancies ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. Henry's obsession faded. By 1536, barely 3 years after their marriage, he wanted her gone. Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, accused of plotting the king's death. The charges were fabricated, absurd, but they served their purpose. On a spring morning in 1536, Anne Boleyn was beheaded in the Tower of London. She wore a grey gown, her dark hair tucked under a white cap. She knelt, and with one stroke of a French swordsman's blade, she died. 11 days later, Henry married Jane Seymour. Jane was everything Anne had not been: quiet, obedient, gentle. And in October 1537, she gave Henry what he needed most: a son, Edward. The prince England had waited nearly 30 years to see. Henry wept with joy. Cannons fired from the tower. Bells rang across the kingdom. God had blessed England at last. But joy turned to grief within days. Jane developed childbed fever and died. Henry was devastated. Of all his wives, only Jane would be buried beside him when his own time came. Henry married 3 more times. Anne of Cleves, a political match that ended in annulment. Catherine Howard, who lost her head in 1542. Catherine Parr, the intelligent widow who outlived him. But the fire that had burned in Henry's youth was gone. The Golden Prince had become a mountain of flesh. An ulcer on his leg suppurated constantly. He could no longer walk easily. His temper became monstrous. Men went to their deaths on his whims. He had changed England irrevocably. The dissolution of the monasteries had destroyed a way of life that had existed for centuries. Thousands of monks and nuns turned out. Ancient libraries burned, vast estates seized and sold. It was the greatest transfer of wealth in English history. It made reconciliation with Rome impossible. On the 28th of January, 1547, at the Palace of Whitehall, Henry Tudor died. He was 55 years old. His body was so vast, it took 16 men to carry his coffin. The king who had once seemed divine ended as all men end, mortal, broken, returned to dust. His son Edward was 9 years old. The boy would reign only 6 years before tuberculosis claimed him. Mary would follow, ruling 5 bitter years, burning hundreds and earning the name Bloody Mary. And then Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, the Princess Henry, had barely acknowledged, would take the throne and give England a golden age. But it was Henry who made that golden age possible, who broke the power of Rome, who made England sovereign, who created the Church of England that still exists today. Henry's legacy is impossible to untangle. He was a monster. 2 wives beheaded, countless others executed, monasteries destroyed, a kingdom traumatized. But he was also the king who made England truly independent, who broke the medieval world and ushered in modernity, who proved that even the Pope's authority could be challenged. Every Protestant Reformation in Europe owed something to Henry's audacity. He wanted to be remembered as a great king, as a warrior, as a scholar. Instead, he is remembered for his wives and his cruelty, for his transformation from golden youth to grotesque tyrant. But perhaps that is fitting, because Henry was never just one thing: brilliant and brutal, charismatic and cruel, romantic and ruthless. A man who wanted to be loved and ended up feared, who wanted to be blessed by God and instead rewrote the rules of faith itself. He was the last medieval king and the first modern one, a titan who cast a shadow so long it still falls across England today. Every time the Church of England holds a service, every time Parliament debates the relationship between church and state, Henry is there, looming, inescapable. He wanted immortality. He achieved it, but not the kind he imagined. 5 centuries have passed. The palaces he built crumble. The monasteries he destroyed lie in ruins. But still, we speak his name. Still, we tell his story. Still, we try to understand the golden boy who became a monster. Because Henry's story is not just about one man or one kingdom. It is about the terrible price of power, about what we are willing to destroy to get what we desire, about how quickly glory turns to tragedy. It is about being human, flawed and magnificent, capable of both greatness and horror, driven by love and ego and fear, building empires and breaking hearts, reaching for God and becoming our own worst devils. Henry Tudor lived 500 years ago, but his story is eternal, because every generation must wrestle with the same questions he faced. When is it right to break with tradition? When does love become an obsession? When does strength become tyranny? When does faith become power? Henry never answered these questions. But in his failure, in his triumph, in the magnificent, terrible arc of his life, he forces us to ask them. And that, perhaps, is the true measure of a king. Not what he built, not what he conquered, but what he made us think about, what he made us question, what he made us remember. The boy who became a king, the king who became a tyrant, the man who tore apart heaven and earth for love, for power, for a son, for a legacy. Henry VIII, the lion and the crown. His story does not offer answers, only echoes, echoes that still ring through history, that still challenges us, that still, after all this time, refuses to be silenced. And perhaps that is exactly as he would have wanted it.